Welcome, everyone. So we're going to start the session. It's my pleasure to invite all of you here. So before we actually start the session, I would like to introduce mock-up. A mock-up was an event which took shape when last year COP26 conference got postponed. The youth were disappointed the youth were disappointed with the sudden change, and hence what we decided we will have our own COP, which mimics the actual COP conferences. So we brought up together over 330 youth delegates representing more than 140 countries. We gathered them online at the conference Small COP26. At the end of the conference, we came up with a powerful statement showing our ambition and dream of the young people worldwide fighting for the fair, equal, and green world. The conference culminated with a global declaration to world leaders with 18 ambitious yet realistic policies covering 6 important themes. Those themes were climate education, climate justice, climate resilience livelihood, physical and mental health, national determined contribution, and biodiversity. We are now in the phase 2, where we are focusing on mobilizing the movement of the young people globally to campaign for their leaders and to show this ambition and implement our treaty in their countries. We have got few very good feedback from various countries like Nigeria and Canada, where we have the leaders showing interest in our treaties and might be helping us to implement their policies as well. So let's move forward with today's agenda. So today's agenda, the mock-up treaty, take us to the climate resilience and green recovery theme. For this meeting, we will have speakers from all around the world. They will be sharing with us their experience and individual knowledge about these crucial topics. So the climate resilience, livelihood, and policies, we came up with 3 main themes. The theme 3.1 states that the develop and implement a national adaptation plan, which covers things like reskilling and entrepreneurial skills in fields like renewables. 3.2 states come up with the sustainable agricultural policies, including assisting farmers to move away from deforestation and damaging soil practices, promotion of plant-based food alternatives, and reduction of food waste. The 3.3 themes come up with the use of green recovery from COVID-19, which does not subsidize fossil fuel and commits to an equitable and fair transition to low carbon. So these are the 3 main themes of climate resilience livelihood, which came up in the after the mock-up conference and in our treaty. So let's move forward, and I will ask our speakers to briefly introduce themselves to us. So let's start with Julia.
Hello, my name is Julia Gettner. I'm based in the United States, in Southern United States, in New Orleans, Louisiana. And yes, I'm the program manager for an organization called Grow Ahead. We work with small-scale farmer cooperatives, mostly cocoa and coffee farmers, to support community-led agroforestry and agroecology projects.
Thank you, Julia, for your introduction. David, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Thank you very much, Sonali. My name is David Okinwa from Nigeria. I'm a final year student of mechanical engineering at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and I am passionate about sustainable energy. My interest in sustainable energy led me to an internship with Manamus Electric, where I helped them design clean energy-based projects. The one I worked on during my internship is a solar-powered cold room where we prevent spoilage of food and fruits and vegetable using cold room powered by the sun. And it was a worldwide project. We also deployed solar energy to homes in Nigeria. And I'm glad to be here today.
We are also glad to have you here, David. Juan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Jose. First of all, thank you very much for this space and the invitation as well. I reckon that these type of spaces help us to deliver the information from different parts of the world, but actually attacking or solving one huge problem that actually affects everyone. I'm from Ecuador. I'm based in Ecuador. I did my studies in business administration, and then I complemented with a master's in environment in the University of Melbourne in Australia. Right now, I'm teaching. I'm a university professor teaching actually sustainability and innovation, and also I have implemented a startup here based in agroecology and permaculture. So I think everyone here are working for the same goal now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for your introduction, and thank you for speaking with us today. So before we move forward with the session, I would actually ask our viewers and panelists if they have any question moving forward with for any of the panelists. They can drop that in the chat box, and we will take a look on them at the end of the session. So let's move forward. And my first question is with Julia. For you, what is sustainable agriculture and what does it mean for you?
Yeah, so I think for sustainable agriculture, there's a lot happening because there's a lot of discussions within agriculture spaces of what does it look like to really be farming in lines with the environment versus against it, and so there's a lot has been focused really on soil health, on carbon sequestration and all of these things. And for me, I always want to also ground in that sustainable agriculture is not just about the environment. It's not just about soil. It's not just about, it's not just about carbon cycles and all of these things, but to have really like sustainable, regenerative, agroecological farming practices. It's about our entire relationship to land, to food, to environment, to each other. And so it really comes down to, both, farming in a way that unites soil health with animal welfare and farm workers' rights and land rights and food sovereignty and carbon sequestration. And so, sustainable agriculture, when we're working towards that, is a really holistic vision to to redo the way that our food system is and redo the way that we interact with, with food and farming to one that is really pushing for, to support both people and the planet.
Thank you so much for that really insightful answer. My next question is for David. Why is renewable energy so crucial in a transition young green recovery?
Please, I did not get it. Can you come again with the question?
Yeah. Why is renewable energy so crucial in a just transition / green recovery?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So the world cannot function without energy. Energy is required in all aspects of human livelihood. Energy powers our development in the 21st century. And over the years, since the Industrial Revolutions, we have seen energy use increase, and most of this energy use come from fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are harmful to the environment. Fossil fuels are harmful to the environment because it produces greenhouse gases, majorly CO2, that when emitted into the atmosphere, acts as creates greenhouse greenhouse effect that increases the temperature of the earth. So for the green recovery and for the green recovery, we need renewable energy, because renewable energy serves the same purpose, creates energy for us, and without the additional effect of damaging the climate. So renewable energy is very, very important for the green recovery and the just transition.
Thank you so much, David. My next question is for Juan. How would you define a green recovery?
Here we go. I don't see it as a green recovery. Yeah, I see it rather as a green regeneration. If we analyze this, John Tillman in 1996, in his book Regenerative Design Talks for Sustainable Development, talks about something that could help us define the green regeneration. The green regeneration is about integrating the human consciousness alongside with scales of harmonization. In order to proceed to a green regeneration, we must understand that the big problem relies in the indiscriminate use of the resources as a whole. So with this background, we can define regeneration as the process to become nature. But how we become nature? By understanding locally that the more consciousness we have about the steady state of the planet as a whole, as Julia said before, it's not about just taking care of the soil. It's taking care about the communities, it's taking care about the economy, okay? Once we understand the steady state of the planet and start finding ways for harmonizing the environment as socially patterns, economically processed, then we'll be able to pursue a green regeneration that will lead us to a sustainable biosphere. So for me, green regeneration is the process to become nature.
That was really thoughtful. That it was really an amazing, concept of viewing nature as well. But before we move forward, I would like our viewers to, if they have any question for any of our panelists, feel free to put them in the chat box. And also, if you want to introduce yourself, we would love to know from where you are. So feel free to have a communication over the chat box. So, Julia, I have a question for you. What role does agriculture play in tackling climate change?
Yeah, so, it's interesting because I think when we think about agriculture, it's both how agriculture is driving climate change, but can also be a solution. So it does have this kind of space in between. So we're thinking that, about 25 to 35% of carbon emissions come from the agriculture, forest, and land sector. And so this is kind of that space in which we can decrease those emissions through what we call kind of as like nature-based solutions, or things like agroecology, reforestation, agroforestry, all of these things. And so, when we're thinking about land use or agriculture as being a driver of climate change, it's also it's thinking about like how we're doing that. So a lot of what's kind of wrong with our food systems or agricultural systems are specifically these kind of colonial models of farming that prioritize extracting as much as you can, as quickly as possible, so as much profit, as much food, as much power, all of these things. So that's where you see the type of farming that we might be very familiar with, depending on where you are, in which we deforest an entire section, monocrop, and then we use as many like synthetic chemical fertilizers, as many inputs, and as we can, to really kind of like juice everything we can out of that land. But all of that is really thinking about short-term profits versus kind of long-term sustainability and the ability to kind of like regenerate that space and that land. So when we're also like looking at agriculture as a driver of climate change, the emissions is not just kind of land use. It's thinking about that, within those emissions, about like 30 3%. So like about a third of that is actually from farming, from land use, and the rest is kind of thinking about the ways in which that distribution happens, ways in which, you know, there's other emissions from cattle and from fertilizers and from others. So when we're thinking about it, like, we really need to be tackling the power structures that are within this industrial agriculture system. So thinking about things like corporate consolidation, thinking about, you know, the ways in which we farm. So from like genetically modified crops and like focusing on fertilizer and focusing on these chemical inputs. Once we can tackle that and really transition into a more regenerative and an agroecological way that we that we farm, then we can use agriculture not just to like take away the emissions, but also to really drive more sustainability. So agriculture has this potential to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere, to you know, to clean our soil and our water. Like it has this potential, but not within this kind of like corporate agriculture system that we currently operate.
Well, thank you so much for telling us about that. For myself, I didn't know like how much important agriculture is in tackling climate change, but I think that it's actually really important for us to start thinking about it from now onwards moving forward. So David, I have the next question for you. What are the key issues preventing renewable energy from expanding faster?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. The issues preventing renewable energy from expanding faster. Now, one thing about renewable energy, which comes from sun, wind, from water, hydro energy, is that they are intermittent. Unlike fossil fuel, when you create a fossil fuel power plant, it can continue burning and turning the turbines to produce energy. But for renewable energy, it's intermittent. So there's sun in the morning, or there's no sun in the night. And that is one of the major issues that we have with renewable energy. Then we need storage. And storage is very expensive now. We need a lot of development in energy storage. One of the most used storage now are the batteries. And batteries are very expensive. They make the cost of, like solar now, for example, the running cost of solar is like $0.01 per kilowatt hour, but batteries, a single kilowatt hour of battery is about $150 for just production. And when you factor in profits that the company will make, it can go up to $350. So battery storage is one major problem of renewable energy, and works are being done to improve the time, their cycles, that is how long they last, to make them more dense, to increase their energy density, because the energy density of batteries now are very low compared to fossil fuel. Like the difference is in thousands. Energy density of fuel, like petrol, like kerosene, like diesel, and that of battery, the difference is very much. That is why, like something like flying airplanes, you can never use batteries, because the weight will prevent the airplane from ever flying. And another thing that is preventing renewable energy progress is awareness. Although awareness over the recent years has increased on the importance of renewable energy in fighting climate change, we need to create more awareness. Governments, people need to be aware of the importance, because when they're aware of the importance, even despite some challenges that renewable energy has, they can go ahead to adopt it. A family that is conscious of sustainability would adopt renewable energy, will adopt solar panels in their homes, because they are aware. But when that awareness is not there and fossil fuel is cheaper, they might find it difficult to adopt renewable energy. So those are some of the issues, some of the problems that are preventing renewable energy from spreading in our current time.
Thank you so much, David. I totally agree. Awareness is like play the key role in starting the change. If we are not even aware of how and what we should do to bring up even the smallest changes we can. So yeah, definitely awareness is something which every one of us should start. At least if we start awareing even one person in our network, they will do it to the other one person, and it will create a long chain, and it will still help in creating the impact. Juan, I have my next question for you. The Global Recovery Observatory shows that we are not building back better, at least not yet. We know a green recovery would be a win for the economy as well as the climate. Now we need to get on with it. What do you think need to be done to ensure sustainable and equitable recovery?
A lot of things starting from them. I mean, a lot of things, but I think the crucial one is leverage the system. Okay. What do I mean when I say leverage the system? We must start to empower the local and small communities, and by communities I mean the system where humans, animals, plants, and microorganisms work alongside. The idea here is to put the formula the local communities, numerically speaking, to understand how far are they from the big institutions. By institutions I mean countries and companies. Then here we can understand the problem. And the problem here is that we need to leverage the system in order to achieve a global advance. Okay, I'm not saying that small stepping stones are useless. What I'm trying to say is that we are running out of time, and small implementations such as Scandinavia with the electric cars are not doing any difference comparing with the new insertion of new fossil fuel cars in India. So basically here the idea is to leverage the systems, then we can achieve at the same time a regenerative process. So if you tell me what we have to do, we have to use the principle of equity, not equality, equity. It's about competing in the same level. Why competing? Because nature as itself is a competition every day, every time, but a fair competition. Yeah, we must understand the limits of our processes and respect the limits of the others. How we do that? By leveraging the system.
That's actually a really good point you have mentioned. Like, I wasn't even able to think like, oh no, that we should actually have been doing that. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, and we need to focus on uh, having a perspective like that. So, David, I have my next question for you. What is an example of renewable energy project that you know of that has had a big impact?
Thank you very much for that question. So renewable energy projects that have had big impact. Now, the nature of renewable energy projects themselves make them already have big impacts. Like in countries like Nigeria, my country, where in the rural communities, they are not connected to the grid, grid regions. Renewable energy projects are decentralized, they are off-grid. They can be standalone systems. So when these projects are implemented in such communities, they can have access to electricity. So it helps to satisfy the need of underserved and unserved communities around the world. Like in Nigeria, in Plateau State in Nigeria, there's a village called Shimakan, and the Rural Agency, which was made in 2006, made the project about 234 kilowatts of solar panels was put there, and that helps to supply energy to about 1,900 homes in that village and the companies in that village. So whenever there are other similar renewable energy projects around the world, like the biggest renewable energy project in solar is being made in China, and that is about 1,234 megawatts of power, and that can supply electricity to about 300,000 homes when it's completed, still under construction. And others still abound in wind turbines being made. Wind turbines usually have higher capacities than solar projects. The biggest one is also being made in China, about 30 gigawatts when it's completed. But now is in process in 2010. Now about 5 gigawatts has been completed. And the whole generation of Nigeria is currently, the whole generation of Nigeria is about 13 gigawatts. And if that single wind farm is completed, it can actually match the generation that we have in Nigeria. So those are some examples of renewable energy projects making impact around the world. So apart from supplying those underserved communities and unserved communities, it also reduces the impact that using fossil fuels for generation we have on the planet.
Oh, thank you so much, David, for telling about those amazing projects. I think I need to look up into those. I'll just Google it up because I'm very much interested into the field of energy and renewable energy myself. So, Julia, I have my next question for you. What are the worst and best farming practices you have seen so far?
Well, I think I touched on that a little bit, thinking about, when we're talking about worst and best practices, I mean, we could talk about it on kind of an individual farm and then talk about it as that looks like kind of on a global scale as well. And so, starting with the worst practices, which is a little bit what I spoke about earlier, and that is kind of what we would think of as a typical industrial farm, in which, we're deforestation for agricultural expanses also causes about 15% of global greenhouse gases. So, once the deforestation happens, then all those trees then release that the carbon that they've been storing. We think about that as kind of like the first step. And then as it goes forward with, farming on that land, once we're stripping of any biodiversity and monoculture cropping, things like staple crops like corn or wheat that are heavily modified, then those crops require a lot of inputs because the soil has been stripped. There is not much biodiversity that they can kind of feed off of. And so that is really creating a space that is dependent on more and more and more inputs. And this, I think, changed a lot, especially during kind of what was considered the Green Revolution in the 50s, 60s, which was this corporate and foundation driven idea that we could really increase agricultural production, with a lot of the things that modernizing a lot of those techniques, thinking about having hybrid seeds and synthetic fertilizers and pesticides that we've kind of spoken about earlier, and what that caused was a really kind of corporate driven food system in which we have just a couple of corporations owning the majority of the seeds in the world. We see regions that had an immense amount of indigenous seeds and indigenous crops those are being completely wiped out, instead focusing on one or two crop varieties. And all of these really, this whole kind of green revolution focused on calories and outputs, rather than thinking about holistic food systems. And so I would say the best farming practices are things that are really kind of either rejecting or undoing those those colonial models of farming. And so we see things like what we would call now as agroforestry, which is kind of like food forest system. So the idea of growing food within a forest system. So, you know, having like hardwood trees and cash crops and like fruit bearing trees all together, really in a biodiverse system. You know, agroforestry as a word is maybe newer in the past couple of years, but like people have been farming, you know, within the forest systems forever. Indigenous communities, peasant communities have been doing that for, you know, for as long as people have been on this planet. And so, you know, when we're thinking about these types of practices that, you know, they're not like new. I think that that's something that's unique, not unique, but like important to talk about, is that like a lot of folks, I think, in like regenerative agriculture in all these spaces want to talk about this as like this new thing that like, you know, a bunch of scientists or a bunch of farmers like found out, and we tested all the soil samples for sequestration and we figured all these things out. But like, we're really just kind of undoing those models of farming to think about the ways that we can work really like within, with, you know, working with the environment to both feed ourselves, feed our communities, and promote biodiversity. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Well, thank you so much. That was really insightful. In personally, I feel like is the best way of agriculture is combining both our traditional as well as the modern way, so that we can have like both, you know, the better to have a better output actually. But I'm not very much sure about it because I don't come from agriculture background. But yeah, thank you so much, Julia, for that example. It was really amazing. Okay, Joan, what are the successful green recovery plans do you know about? It can be any international or local or regional plans.
Okay, by framing as successful, I don't like to frame, because at the end we must think as everyone is doing their part, but some of them are actually more compromised with the goal. So I like to talk about more the feeling that we have towards our actions. I do have some examples. For example, the one that I'm working right now, my startup is actually building I don't know if you have heard from the concept of cradle to cradle. Okay, so actually we think that we don't need any more garbage. So actually we work with garbage. That's the principle of cradle to cradle. Reactivate what we are throwing into the rubbish box, and we are constructing permaculture structures that are attractive to the people. Okay, the only way to create conscious is about using innovation that triggers something inside of you and it provokes the motivation. Actually, we're building huge urban gardens. We're activating social community spaces where there is a lack of green. Also, there's another company I know from my country. I like to speak for my country because we have heaps of examples worldwide. That's called Circular. Circular actually works to reduce the amount of plastic cans and bottles in the community, and also clean the water by inserting some turbines that actually helps you move the river in a better way, and actually collecting the damage, the microorganism damage that we have when we throw waste into the water. One example that I like to recall also in my classes and in my conference is the one that is implemented in Australia called Thank You Water. Okay, Thank You Water is a business model that actually is helping the economy, not only in Australia but also in the Southeast Asia. Okay, what I'm trying to say with these examples is that at the end of the day, we must understand our commitment with what we are doing. As I said before, conscious. More conscious we have about things, the better examples we're going to recall from. These are some examples. I for sure know that probably all the people that is here could help me with more, but I would like to tell you what is happening in Ecuador, in South America, what we are trying to achieve. And the big problem in South America is carbon sequestration. Also, more than carbon sequestration, agriculture, the waste in agriculture, as Julia said, okay, through the Green Revolution, and implement and fed by the by the great acceleration in 1950s. Actually, it's a big combo that we yet are not recovering from. But that's that. Answering your question, these are some of the examples that I can share with you right now.
Oh, thank you so much, Juan, for those examples. Like I have heard about the to water. Like I think one of my colleagues used to work in that organization before, so I've heard from there. It is really one of the amazing projects which I've heard about so far. Julia, I have a next question for you. How has agriculture changed over recent years?
Yeah, so I think I've talked a bit about that, thinking about the ways in which, technology and modernization has really changed the agricultural systems, focusing on things like the Green Revolution and stuff like that. But I would say that, in recent years also, there's been, maybe not as substantial in like actual land space and stuff, but definitely in kind of our conversations around agriculture and within agricultural spaces, there has been, a large refocusing on more kind of sustainable and regenerative models of agriculture. And I think that that's really important because, a lot of times when we're thinking about things like organic farming or fair trade, or like a lot of these, we're thinking about like personal health. And I think especially in a place like the United States and a lot of global North countries, there is a focus that like you eat organic produce because like you don't want toxic pesticides in you, and so therefore like you're doing it as this like individual choice for personal health, where I think it's always really important to kind of like flip that and think about, okay, so why are actually like organic and agroecological practices not just about you as an individual person and individual consumer, but thinking about throughout that supply chain. So like if we're thinking about human impact, like how are we talking about farm workers who spend countless hours within fields that are inhaling toxic pesticides that are, really, not only affecting them, but their families and their communities. How are we thinking about the ways in which those, those chemicals then become part of our water systems? How do we think about the way that, that affects biodiversity and reducing, plant and animal life in other ways? And so I think that the conversation around agriculture is starting to shift to that, systems thinking. And that's not new. Like people have been doing that all the time. When I'm talking about that conversation, I'm talking about at kind of like the top, at the ways in which some like, folks in higher and power structures are talking about that. And so this form of thinking about, what does a sustainable or regenerative agricultural practice look like, is interesting going forward, because right now the industrial agriculture like doesn't feed the world. And I think that that's always something to remember and to think about, is that 70% of food is 70% of the world's food comes from small scale farmers, from peasant food webs, from small holders, and they really only have access to about 30% of that land. And so if we think about how to take those peasant food models, think about that type of agriculture and that type of food system. And if we can expand that to the, the land and the resources that, the large industrial system has, we would be able to not only be feeding the world, but also really kind of like healing the planet in the ways that our agriculture is connected to, both people and the planet.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that. So before I ask the next question, I will ask our viewers, if you have any question for our panelists, feel free to drop in the chat box so that we can, ask our panelists these questions. Okay, so David, I have my next question for you. How has renewable energy changed or improved in recent years?
Renewable energy in recent years. Okay, so in recent years, the move in renewable energy are where governments are more conscious of the fact that renewable energy is needed. The number of countries that has renewable energy target has doubled over the last 10 years. And that is good improvement. That's good improvement. But then it has been a little slow. Considering the fact that, okay, energy contributes about 73% of carbon emissions to the atmosphere, it means that energy has to move towards sustainability, it has to move towards renewable and clean energy. And by the way, clean energy does not just include renewable. Clean energy includes both renewable energy and nuclear energy, because nuclear energy produces minimal and negligible amount of carbon dioxide in this production of energy. So over the years, renewable energy use has increased, investment in renewable energy has increased, but then it has been slow. Between 1990 and of the world energy use that came from renewable and nuclear, that came from clean energy, was about 13%. But now the percentage of the world energy use that came from clean to 15%. But when we look at it, renewable energy has greatly increased, but nuclear energy, the use of nuclear energy has decreased almost commensurately. And then the total amount of energy that we need in the world has greatly decreased. But now it's up to 170,000 terawatt hour. As well growing. So that only means that we have to work harder, invest more and clean energy, and ensure that it grows more from now. And projections that International Energy Agency, IEA, International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, the projections they have made is that by 2050, we should have more than half of the world energy from renewable energy sources. Yeah, so it has grown over the years, but the growth is small, and we need to improve that growth.
Thank you so much, David. I have the next question for you. What are the main sectors where there are tangible opportunities for the green economy in Ecuador and in the world?
I beg your pardon. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, definitely. What are the main sectors where there are tangible opportunities for the green economy in Ecuador and in the world?
Okay. I think the main sectors that we have to put attention on, for me, there are multiple sectors, okay? But for me, actually, it's agriculture, I do believe that all the sectors are connected. Okay, so not because I'm choosing one, I'm not working towards the other one. As I said before, they are linked. So once we make some improvement in one, we can actually better the others. Before continuing, actually, the topic of the renewable energy is so controversial. When we right now the idea just came to my mind. But continuing with the question, the sector is agriculture. Okay, through the implementation of agroecology, according to me. Okay, uh, why implementing agroecology systems? First we must understand the concept as itself. As I said, we must know the meaning, implement the meaning first deep inside of us in order to make a reproduction to the world. Okay, so agroecology is a way of diversifying agriculture, taking into account the ecological principles of food management and agricultural systems in order to generate self-sustained and environmentally regenerative systems. What I'm trying to say is that through the source that feed the humanity, okay, agriculture, implemented with the tool called agroecology, is the sector that we can start improving as a worldwide spectrum. So answering your question, the main sectors where the opportunity is so visible in terms of the green recovery, not only in Ecuador, but also in the world economy, is agriculture. Agriculture is the base model, according to me, is the base model because since then, all the evolution of humanity was made. If we start to recall, if we start to go back, agriculture, the understanding of the agriculture itself was the responsible of make the reproduction of the human mankind. Okay, because we start to understand that being nomad was not the base for maintaining ourselves in the planet. Then we learn agriculture, and when we learn to settle. Where we learn to settle, we start to develop any type of energies for staying there. Fire. Okay, so basically the backbone structure that we have to put attention to it's agriculture. Also, sector, answering the question.
Thank you so much. It's very amazing that how agriculture sector definitely a key role in all the green economy and everything. Okay, David, I have one question for you. How does renewable energy help addressing climate change?
Okay, so renewable energy really helps prevent climate change. Now, before we understand how renewable energy can help in climate change, we need to know and we need to understand very well the root cause of climate change. Now, climate change is caused by some gases that have greenhouse effect called greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide gas, methane, the chlorofluorocarbons accumulating in the atmosphere. Now, and these gases have their amount in the atmosphere has increased over the years because of human activities. And one of the major human activity that has increased these gases in the atmosphere is our quest for energy, because we need energy in our industries to power our industrial equipment, to produce things that we need. We need energy for transportation. The fuels used for transportation all comes from energy. In fact, anything that involves motion usually requires energy. We need energy for heating and cooling. We need energy for electricity, and something that none of us can do without. All of us, we cannot do without electricity. So now, this energy need and the way we go about producing energy produces a lot of greenhouse gases. Like I said earlier, 73% That is huge. That means if we solve the problem of energy and we ensure that the energy industry is really, really sustainable, then we have almost solved all of climate change, 75%. And now, not that all greenhouse gases, we just remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, because if there are no greenhouse gases, the temperature of the earth will be like minus 18 degrees Celsius and cannot survive, but we just need it in an optimal amount. So now, renewable energy, if majority of our energy comes from renewable, it will reduce the amount of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Not that there are other environmental concerns, like and hinted, that is a little controversial because there are other environmental concerns attached to renewable energy, but then most that does not involve it in emitting carbon dioxide gas into the atmosphere. So in short, or in a nutshell, the way renewable energy help to solve the problem of climate change is that it reduces the amount of greenhouse gases that energy emits into the atmosphere.
Thank you so much, David, for that answer. Julia, we got a question for you. With the present food shortage, is it possible to achieve regenerative agriculture, and what are the indicators towards achieving that?
Yeah, so I think I answered this a little bit earlier, in which I said that like the industrial food system doesn't actually feed like the majority of the world. And that is just a fact that 70% of the food that communities eat comes from peasant food systems. And so, you know, when we're thinking about this, like, again, you know, as a global system, like we produce enough food. It's really a distribution problem. It's how food kind of gets to communities. And so this is where the shift from food security to food sovereignty is really important. So, you know, for a long time, from large institutions, international institutions like the UN, the push is food security, is that everyone needs to, you know, have a secure relationship, that they're going to eat, that they're going to have food, that they're going to have access to food. But what happens there is that, you know, we're then not talking about what that food is. We're not talking about what that agriculture is. We're not talking about, you know, like if we're doing it just on a base, like calories needed for people to, you know, do daily life. And then we're just kind of basing it down on these models, thinking about calories. Then we're not thinking about nutrients. We're not thinking about like holistic well-being. We're not thinking about the cultural ramifications of like, of ripping up a community's food system and then replacing it with like import grains or things like that. And so I think here the focus is really food sovereignty. And the idea of food sovereignty has really been pushed forward from peasant methodologies. So from large movements like La Via Campesina and others, which are these, you know, really large peasant networks that talk about, you know, food sovereignty is the power to have decision making of your own over your own food system. So it is the power of communities, of peasant, indigenous, local communities to be able to have that decision making power over what kind of food they want to grow, you know, how that looks like culturally, what, you know, having a stake within those supply chains, because a lot of you know, a lot of times when we think about the people who are growing the food and their separation from the food end product that is being sold, and how are those kind of like industrial supply chains really separating the people who grow the food from like the people who consume it. We think about things like coffee, in which like coffee growing communities can't afford to buy the coffee that's produced. We think about like all of these things that we're talking about, like is really important, because when we just talk about it as like food shortage, then we're taking the power structures away. We're taking the ways in which we understand how we relate to food. And so that is why, you know, this idea of like regenerative agriculture isn't this just like, oh, like fluffy, we should be like farming in this like nice and friendly way. It's really like, how are we like ripping up systems of oppression, thinking about agroecology, which Juan very nicely defined for us because I forgot to define it earlier, and thinking about the ways in which like humans and like are part of these are part of nature. Like humans and nature are not separate. How do we think about our system, our food systems as part of these large kind of like ways in which we relate to the planet? And the reality is that like, while there is a transition between using lots of chemical inputs to having a more kind of like regenerative or agroecological farm, and there might be a little bit of weirdness while your soil is trying to reacclimate, like in the long term, agroecological, regenerative, organic farming produces more food, and it produces like, yes, more high quality and calorie rich, and nutrient rich food, not just calorie rich. And the last thing that I'll say kind of in that is that, a lot of the solutions that we're thinking about can be very binary. So when we talk about like, the Amazon rainforest and how, we just recently had a report that areas of the Amazon rainforest that used to be a carbon sink are now releasing more carbon than they're sequestering. And that's a huge issue to think about, like, and one of the largest drivers, at least for agriculture there, is thinking about deforestation for cattle. And so, then we're talking about what does like the ways in which like our international supply of cattle look like. And then we know that from a lot of things like Project Drawdown, one of the largest, one of the most effective climate solutions is like silvopasture, is thinking about how do we raise cattle like within a forest system and have them kind of grazing, and not just like clear cutting land for cattle to exist. And so I think that there's also like, we're needing to be thinking about like creative and like, yeah, culturally important and like local solutions to food systems, because I think sometimes they're like, everyone go vegan is really great. Like, I definitely believe in a plant-based diet, but thinking about everything very binary is hard because like food sovereignty is not about binary thinking. Food sovereignty is about like, is about that kind of like local production and power over food systems.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that.
Sorry, I really hope I didn't. That was not an anti-veganism thing. I have a plant-based diet, so I feel like maybe I shouldn't have put that in because I'm going to make people mad. But I'm talking about more just like the ways that we make solutions need to be really grained in like the local communities that are making those decisions.
Thank you so much. And I'm definitely sure it's not anti-vegan. So you don't have to worry about that. Okay, John, I have a question for you. In the context of COVID-19, are there any lessons learned from the agriculture sector that could be drawn from the adaptation of local economy and related restrictions?
Yeah, indeed, there are some lessons learned from the agriculture sector. But I think that the first lesson that we have to acknowledge is what COVID has made to our lives. Okay, that's the first thing to actually analyze. In COVID, I truly believe that a lot of people have questioned things, trying to understand the why. But I think that the real question is what for. Yeah, the what for is will be the one that triggers the action. So answering your question, what are the lessons from agriculture in COVID-19? Actually, the lesson is quite simple, and it's based on the principle of biomimicry. Okay, mimic nature. Okay, the lesson, according to me, is understanding your local situation. Okay, as Julia said before, yeah, it's about food sovereignty. But food sovereignty is also understanding what are the resources that you have access to. No, nature does not think, oh, I want to have the life. I live in the jungle. I'm a tiger from the jungle, and I don't think like I'm a Siberian tiger. I live in the cold. Actually, they adapt to the resources that they have access to. So agriculture in this case, in COVID-19 especially, has taught us what we have access to and how we can work with those resources. At the end of the day, think locally is implementing what we have access to. Why should I improve the massive use as an agroecology strategy of cattle, or what type of cattle I am using? In this case, for example, in Ecuador, we actually have this species called the guinea pig. For here we call cuy, and we actually need to improve the use of that, because the regeneration of the methane that actually produce the guinea pig is perfect for our soil, rather than the one that cows make it. So the lessons from agriculture is understanding the resources that we have access to and how we can make it possible and achieve the maximum yield without compromising the other generations. And by generations, I'm not saying only humans, generations in nature, generations in microorganisms. Okay, so as I said before, the lesson is mimic nature. That's where everything starts. And this is not a hippie speech, okay? No, this actually is a really logic speech. If nature has survived through all these years and make an adaptations and mitigation process that work for them quite well, why don't copy that? Why don't implementing that? Okay. Here the real species that's in danger is human being. Just analyze how long it takes to us for generate a perfect body to resist this type of weather condition. And right now we're actually not doing quite well. I will recall the example of Germany this couple of days before. Yeah, in nature, actually, in the Germans have a saying that says der Weckruf der Natur, which actually means the wake-up call from the nature. So nature actually is telling us something. What is nature is telling us is that they can survive without us. So go back to the principle of agriculture as the lesson learned from COVID is the stepping stone to starting to build sustainable clusters, not big society, clusters from starting locally, act globally, So basically that's the main thing about the lessons learned. If we haven't learned anything, we are kind of doomed, and the clock is ticking and it's not waiting for us.
No, I totally agree. I think COVID-19 itself gave us the big lesson that it is time for us to wake up and start acting right now, or else we have nothing left moving forward. Okay, David, we got a question for you. What role do you think hydrogen should play in energy system?
Hydrogen. Okay, so hydrogen is a clean fuel. Well, what makes fossil fuel produce greenhouse gas? What makes them dirty is the amount of carbon content in them. And when they are burnt, CO2 is produced and all that. But hydrogen does not have any carbon. Hydrogen is just hydrogen. And when hydrogen is burnt, the byproduct it produces is water. So hydrogen is will play a good role going forward. But the problem with hydrogen, or the challenge, the challenge that hydrogen has now is the process of producing hydrogen. Like there are many processes of producing hydrogen, but many of them are energy intensive. So using energy to produce hydrogen and then burning that hydrogen to produce energy. And there's efficiency losses in all of these processes. But then hydrogen will definitely over time, when more research and innovation is being done in the production process of hydrogen, you can split water to get hydrogen, can get hydrogen from methane and other processes. Definitely hydrogen will play a very good role. And hydrogen is being used in fuel cells. And if more research is even done, you could use hydrogen in flying airplanes. But then before it will give any benefits to the environment, to climate, the process of producing energy needs to be improved to make it more friendly to the environment and to make it less energy intensive. Or we use renewable energy sources to produce the hydrogen and then use it for other purposes.
Thank you, David. So we have taken an end of our session. Before we end the session, I have one last one for our panelists. How could we get the attention of youth and the leaders to ensure a more nature-based solution? Joan, would you like to answer this?
Sure. I think that the catalyzer here for creating this need to take action to is using incentives. Okay, the good thing about being interdisciplinary, as I call myself, it's not a new tendency, but it's actually for me the way of approaching the problems from different perspectives. That's why, as you have seen in the talk, due to my background in business and environment, I can mix both of them in order to make it good for the nature and also good for the people as economically speaking. And when I say we must find this process of triggering the action to is through incentives. And I'm going to speak in an economic way. Why incentives? I believe that the only way to trigger the real motivation, because motivational is personal, okay? If someone doesn't want to make something, nothing in the world will make this someone do the thing, okay? So motivation is an internal process triggered by incentives. The more incentives we have, the more motivation we generate. So generated actions, as I said before, I believe that the only way to trigger a real motivation for regenerating actions towards the environment is attractive incentives, analyzing from this social perspective, economically speaking, and political thinking, political acting. Yeah, this will trigger the action of acting. Motivation is the action of acting, as is defined the concept of motivation. So instead of having a system full of regulation and punishments, okay, so we have to understand that the entire system is built by punishments, okay? You have a tax, and people actually are losing interest in taking action, not because they don't want to take action, because the punishment is so big that actually make us feel little. It's not about feeling little, it's about to feel empowered, okay? So the system as it is built itself is not quite the best system, as we are quite aware, and that's the huge problem. But we have to act. So the act, or the way of acting, is through incentives, okay, that make the system, okay, feel or show this attractiveness to the people, to the youth, okay, especially millennials. I reckon that everyone here is a millennial. not all of us, but probably a lot of us. And actually, we have to understand, anthropological speaking, how we act. How we act is not the same actions as our grandfathers did. We have to understand how we can trigger the economy, how we can trigger the people from where are we right now. Okay, so the way to trigger the people where are we right now is through incentives. Okay, we must generate incentives that are that use innovation within it. Okay, I think that the best way of doing is innovation is by imitation, putting your signal in the middle. Okay, it's not a process of copying, of being a copycat. No, it's not about being a copycat. It's about taking the influence from someone else, tropicalizing the idea, making a process of adaptation through your reality, and then deliver a new product. So by delivering a new product, what I'm trying to say is that the incentives will change the reality and will help the people to be more aware of what they are doing. And in there is the real potential result that we can obtain for the environment. In conclusion, what I'm trying to say is that we have to reprogram our way of thinking, not only as a person, but also as a community that think more as a coping structure based on motivating the people by the implementation of incentives. And actually that will be a logical way of living in coherence with mimicking the nature. As I said before, here the inspiration comes from nature. If we haven't learned so far what nature has taught us, as I said before, we are doomed. And actually, it's not quite difficult to learn from them. We just only have to observe, to listen, not to hear, to listen the nature. So incentives is the way to solve, answering your question, Sonali. Here, I think that the thing here is basically catch the attention of the youth and the health leadership by generating incentives quite attractive for everyone. Here, we are not here as being judges, because we are for nature, we cannot judge any other action. But what we have to do is learn how we can copy everyone, because here the big problem are not only big corporations. They do affect all the system, but we have to learn to live with them. As I said before, there are big sharks in the ocean. That is not the reason why the small fish go out and take a swim. No, that's not the problem. The problem is how to learn to generate different type of incentives for coping, for working alongside, and also creating the necessity of this motivation for this generation. Okay, I'm not talking about the future. No, we are solving we are trying to save the world for future generations. The problem is now. We have to be quite aware of that. Yeah, we're doing for the future generations as well, but what happened with us? So that's the thing, incentives.
Thank you so much. Need to work on. So with this, we have come to an end of the session. And I would really like to thank our speakers for coming up here and sharing their view with us. It was a pleasure for us to just read out.
Well, thank you so much for having us. This was a great conversation, and it was great to be alongside both of you as panelists. And I enjoyed hearing so much about both of your work.
as well. Thank you very much
If
for
and you
this.
want, thank you guys so much for coming. Now, if you want to know more about more, you can follow us on our Instagram, you can YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn, Facebook, or our web page as well. So we have, or if you want to have more mock to the mock community, we have a surprise for you in the chat box. We are basically have the copy of our treaty, and we would like you to sign it and share with your respective leaders in your countries so that they can help us implement.
Thank you so much, everyone. I know Sonali's internet is just cutting in and out. So yeah, I'm not sure if you're still there or not, Sonali, but yeah, as she was saying, the document I just sent into the chat is a letter just in case anyone here in the audience wants to get involved and kind of take action after listening to this incredible webinar. That's just a simple letter that you can send to your world leaders around the world. And as she said, you can also go check us out on social media to find out more how you can get involved and learn about the campaign. But once again, thank you so much to all three of our panelists. All three of you were amazing, and I learned so much from all of you. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. And we realize it went a little over time, but we really appreciate it. And we really appreciate all of your expertise and passion on these issues. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much for having us.